So, hey, be careful, you're going to dump this thing over. Now, we are on to Sami. And I haven't even read all of Sami, so there we go. Where's that blue pen? I have it handy. Oh, there it is. Alright. So, where elements touch and merge, where shadows swoon like outcasts on the sand, in the tried moment waits, its courage gone, there were we, in latitudes where storms are born. Arna Botam's Reconnaissance. Reconnaissance, that's where you watch something, right? Sorry, I got reposition. We should have done this. Oh no, the pens are all gonna tip over. That's why it's Kate brought the whole thing instead of just one pen. Because we just can't do things easy way. On January 2006, and after a 4-year absence, Sami, a door-sized man, I like that, with soft eyes, a cliff for a nose, and shoulders the mass of Rhode Island, wow, was finally going back to college. For the last 6 months, he had been living in his parents' house and surviving on unemployment. The days were slow and the money meager, though he had managed to squeeze in a few side trips with Anna, his girlfriend, and was basically enjoying himself, but he knew that this period in his life was cresting to an end. Now was the time to start some serious planning for the future. He was already 24 years old, after all. What he needed was a career. So Sami enrolled in a sports management program at a local private university. It's the kind of place that has well-dressed students strolling around green lawns with flat hedges and century-old trees. But instead of the luster of autumnal golds and reds that greet most new students, Sami saw the campus as gray and cold. He had arrived in January, and the leaves had abandoned their trees long before. When he showed up on campus, the other students were returning from winter break, and we would see them congregating in small groups, sitting down on benches, laughing loudly into cell phones, or hanging out in vestibules with their cigarettes. Don't ever smoke. The air was old enough to disguise smoke. The air was cold enough to disguise smoke and breath. Sami knew no one here, so on most days, he would come and go without much conversation, but he was always smiling regardless, a huge, real, and athletic grin. Sami was fundamentally happy to be in school again. The world, not just school, but the whole world, seemed open and exciting and full of possibility. One day, after class had barely begun for the semester, Sami was walking down one of the paths. Out of nowhere, he heard 2 young women calling out to him from a distance. "Yusuf! Mohammed!" they called, and they yelled, looking right at him. "Yusuf," one called out again. "Mohammed," the other repeated, and they waved their hands madly in his direction. He looked behind reflexively, but no one was there. Confused, he shrugged them off, figuring they had the wrong guy, and continued walking. It must be a case of mistaken identity, he surmised. And then, a few days later, he passed them again. There they were, all flowing dark hair and liquid eyes, and so he stopped to talk to them, especially since they were cute. What about Anna? Oh, jeez. Vocal and charmingly aggressive. I don't know how you can be charming and aggressive, although, they're cute and they're hitting on him, that kind of thing. He asked them why they were yelling out to him the other day. "We were wondering if you are Arab," one of them replied, smiling straight at him. They were Palestinian, from Brooklyn, like him, and they invited him to come to the next meeting of the Arab Students Club. Sami was surprised. He wasn't accustomed to people identifying him as Arab American. "Are you Spanish?" is the question he hears most of the time. His Sunset Park High School was populated mostly with Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and African Americans. All his girlfriends have been Latinas. He's darker skinned than the rest of his family, to the point that even his father will joke with him by asking, "Are you sure you are part of this family?" Nor did he particularly identify with his Arab background. Sami's parents are Arab Christians. his Egyptian mother, a waitress at a local diner. His Egyptian mother, a waitress at a local diner, came to New York from Cairo in 1974, and his septuagenarian father, a Palestinian from Haifa, arrived in Brooklyn in 1949, mere months after the establishment of the State of Israel, what Palestinians refer to as the, oh my God, I just ripped the page, as the Nakba, the catastrophe. But that was a long time ago. And his father, a retired cab driver who owns his own medallion. See, like, New York City, they have to have some special thing to be a cab. The official and coveted permit assigned to each taxi by the city. You're going to dump that pen over, I'm going to beat you. In a brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, doesn't talk about it much. Sami, too, is not particularly political, especially when it comes to the upheavals in the Arab region. He sums up the paroxysms of the Middle East with common sense talk. There will never be peace over there while there's tension between the Arabs, he told me, with Christian detachment one spring afternoon. He's a Brooklynite through and through. He spends his day at school, and most nights working 2 jobs, as a security guard at a gym, and as a car service driver. What he jokingly refers to as a stereotypical Arab job. That is so true. But lately, his circumstances kept bringing him back to the importance of his Arab roots. So, he decided to go to the campus meeting. There, he met the other Arab students at his college and began hanging out with them, partly from the ethnic tribalism that pervades much of higher education and American society at large, and partly in a search for new friends. He's naturally affable, so he got along with everyone immediately, even if most were several years his junior. But after a while, he was finding himself getting into heated arguments with some of the guys, disputes specifically over the war in Iraq and the American military presence there. The quarrels could often become heated, and they would frustrate Sami. But still, he would continue to return to the club. It was as if he were looking for something and escaping at the same time. So looking for it and escaping. Strange. I'm like the most far-off Arab you'll find, he complained to me one day when talking about his relationship with some of the guys in the club. Yes, like something stuck in my throat. Part of Kate. Are you still alive over there, or did I take a chop out of you? Yeah, must have. Okay, I think I bit off part of you and it's stuck in my throat. Did you hear me? Hello? Oh. This iPad's bad for the brain. I'm like the most far-off Arab you ever find, he complained to me one day when talking about his relationship with some of the guys in the club. We were sitting in the backyard of a Starbucks in Park Slope. You have to be a Muslim to be an Arab. You have to listen to Arab music all the time to be Arab. You have to be in love with going wherever your parents are from. You have to marry an Arabic girl to be an Arab. Certain things, you're not a real Arab if you're like me. I don't listen to Arabic music. I don't watch Arabic programming. I hate going to Egypt. I hate going overseas. I date a Puerto Rican female. Is blood thicker than water? This is the question swirling around Sami. Oh my gosh, I just have to cough. But his disagreements with the others are less theoretical in character. Rather, they hang like talismans around his neck. When I asked him about these verbal sparrings, he reached under his collar and pulled out his dog tags. I chill with a lot of Arab guys now, and they hate these, he said, looking right through me. They ask how many Iraqis did I kill? How could I fight in the war? One of the guys from the university told me, there are 2 people whose bodies I will not pray over. Yasser Arafat and that soldier. Sami doesn't care much for the criticism. He thinks most of it is armchair politics, misplaced and misinformed. He's been to Iraq and they haven't. He didn't kill anyone. Didn't see much direct combat, and now he's strangely critical of the war. Strongly critical of the war, but solidly behind the troops. Yet, Sami is still something quite rare in the United States today. He's an Arab American soldier, an accidental fighter turned proud Marine who has been away from his formal education for 4 years because he has served 2 tours in Iraq. 3 years ago, everything was different. In March 2003, Sami was in Kuwait with the radio sector of the headquarters battalion of the 1st Marine Division. Like everyone else with him, he was waiting for the order to cross the berm and begin invasion of Iraq. Also, like everyone else, he was full of both dread and desire. Oh, look at that, an oxymoron. Can you be both dread, that means fear something, and want it at the same time? The anticipation was making all of them restless, but war, real war, where people lose limbs and die, also scared the crap out of the 20-year-old, and most of his friends too, even if no one said as much. They had been in Kuwait since the middle of February, having flown there from their base camp in Camp Pendleton, California, but everyone had known for months that they were going to war. What they didn't know was when. Now in Kuwait, for more than a month, they were stuck waiting in the desert. When they'd first arrived, all they did in Kuwait was train. Then train some more. Then train again while they waited. Sami set up radio networks, took them down, set them up. He did drills in the desert. He maintained his equipment. He cleaned his equipment again. Sounds like they're bored. He inventoried his equipment, then cleaned. Crap. Here. I need that giraffe. I was holding my page down. Let's see. Gathering or cleaning was not just a means of distraction. Everything was getting battered constantly by the sand. For the first month, it seemed as though the enemy were not Saddam Hussein, but simply the sand. It was everywhere, like an omen. A huge sandstorm struck them on their first day in Kuwait, turning the whole world beige. But even after the storm ended, the sand continued to be brutal. Even on normal days, it would hit them in the eyes, which would get all crusty. It would land on their lips, which would dry out immediately. It always blew into their mouths, so that all they tasted was sand all the time. It was as if the sand were playing them in a divine game of rock, paper, scissors. But in this version, sand trumps everything. Sand defeats water. Sand kills fire. Sand smothers man and all his measly weapons. Am I reading too loud? That's too sad. Oh, well, I guess you'll have to go watch your movie somewhere else because I don't care. They learned eventually to seek refuge from the menace when and where they could. Can you just be quiet and go away? The backs of trucks, this isn't your bedroom anyway. The backs of trucks, like covered wagons, were favored spots in the Kuwaiti desert. And there, during their off hours, the soldiers spoke to each other about their feelings while they traded stories. It was at this time that word got around the division that Sami spoke Arabic. He had tried to use this fact to his advantage stateside, that means back in the U.S., but he'd failed miserably. Since then, he told a few other people in the military about his background and language skills, something most people didn't realize at first. They too had assumed that he was Latino. But when his Arab roots appeared, the comments came rushing out. He became Al-Qaeda and Sand Nigger. Oh, I just said that. I totally was not expecting that word. The names just slid off his back. This was the Marines, after all, where profanity is elevated beyond sport to art. I'd fit in there. Most people continue to consider him mostly a New Yorker. And Dan, a Puerto Rican from Florida and his closest friend in the service, had long before branded him simply New York. That was the name that eventually stuck with Sami, but his Arabic language ability was about to come in handy. One day in Kuwait, while they were waiting to invade Iraq, he was called to the tent to the commanding officer, a major who would become a father figure to the young Marine. Several other low-ranking officers were there. They too knew that Sami spoke Arabic, and the officers told him straightforwardly that they didn't want to send him away to become an interpreter. That was a common course of action with Arabic-speaking soldiers. But the officers had decided they wanted to keep him close by. They were assigning him to become the major's driver. I'm so sorry. I can't get comfortable. The major wanted a driver who knew the local language and customs, he was told, in case something happened. Hey, this is great. Weeks later, and only when they crossed the border, did Sami realize what this really meant. He would be riding at the very front of his company. That's not a good thing. At the head of the cavalry and first in line of fire. But after a month, Kuwait had become a bore. A monotony of bad food and no showers. Then, on the night of March 20th, the entire company was assembled. They were told that the operation in Iraq would begin the next morning. They were regaled with stories about how vicious the Iraqis were. They were reminded that the enemy will do everything in his power to kill you. No one questioned the mission, including Sami. The attacks of September 11th, 18 months earlier, go away, were still fresh in everybody's memory and continued to smart like a collective wound. It didn't matter that this was Iraq and not Afghanistan. I'm going to stab that up your nose. Saddam Hussein and not Osama bin Laden. Tomorrow, everyone agreed there would be payback. Sami, too, felt this way. The president had told them to go, and he was their commander-in-chief, which meant he was always correct by virtue of rank. Do what you have to do, they were told, and let's do this like Marines. Everybody screamed. Their blood rushed with excitement, and Sami, too, was pumped. But even more, he was scared. They were told to point all the vehicles of the company facing north, so that tomorrow they could be ready to ride across the border. And then they were sent off to get some sleep. But no one slept. Who could, knowing that tomorrow there would be war? Sami and Dan and a handful of others slipped into the back of one of the trucks, where they smoked cigarettes and talked deep into the night. The conversations covered everything. Favorite and missed foods, current girlfriends and past lovers, getting paid and spending money, everything but what was going to happen the next morning. No one wanted to say a word about that. Around 5 in the morning, one of the first air campaigns of the war began, and they watched the bombing of Safwan Hill from inside the truck. They put on their night vision goggles and peered out the back as munitions lit up the desert sky into fireballs of red and orange. They roared. They were unloading on that mountain, Sami told me, and we were cheering like it was the 4th of July. I'm thinking, Jesus, what are we about to do to these people? I wrote a letter to my dad the next day. Dad, they're about to murder everybody in this place. Sami was born in Bellevue Hospital in 1982. He grew up in Park Slope, Brooklyn, now a family-oriented neighborhood full of progressive politics and multi-million-dollar real estate. It hosts cafes, bookstores, organic food stores, and handmade jewelry stands. Sami's father bought into the area before it went bourgeois. That means fancy, Sami went to high school in a crumbling Gothic structure just beyond Sunset Park before he attended Baruch College, a vertical university in Manhattan, for a year on a baseball scholarship where he was a catcher. At Baruch, he studied finance, but his first stab at college was uninspiring. He felt lost. School was easy. Oh, yeah, that was one of the questions I had you guys do.
School's not easy.
Well, for him, school was easy. Let's see. He felt lost. School was easy, and that he could manage without even going to class. Like, it's so easy, and he really wasn't inspired. And I think it was because he didn't know what he wanted to do. That's my theory. So he left school, and he felt empty. So he didn't have a career that he really was inspired and working towards. I'm pretty sure I did the question. By the spring, let's see. So he could manage, let's see. So school was so easy that he could manage without even going to class, but his grades suffered from his own self-confessed indolence. So that means, like, he just didn't care. By the spring of 2001, after the school year had ended, Sami felt empty. He found himself thinking about how he hadn't achieved anything, and how on the weekends he was still asking his mom for money to go out. Is this how it's going to be? He would ask himself, referring to college, like glorified high school. That summer, a Marine recruiter called him at home. The recruiter had his number from 2 of Sami's high school friends who'd recently enlisted. This is one way that the U.S. Army Armed Forces fills its rank, through a network that is essentially a big chain letter. The call caught Sami completely off guard, but it also intrigued him. The man was a professional and could sell the rust off an old bathtub, so he was a really good talker. He talked a lot and promised Sami job skills, money for school, and travel around the world. I wanted to see something else, Sami told me, bored with life at his parents' house. Oh, Abby wants to go to Ice Yolks and get ice cream, and then I will go home. Well, I can't even text her because I'm doing your thing. I hope she figures it out. He didn't tell his parents that he was being courted in a well-worn and well-scripted romance with the military. Ew. Sami would go and talk to the man in his spare time. He was constantly flattered and promised the moon. He would ask about joining the reserves as a part-timer, and the recruiter assured him that he would be just fine.
It's green.
That would be just fine. Whatever Sami wanted, he could have. And Sami had what he later characterized as his moment of insanity. He decided to throw caution and college to the wind and just sign the contract on his own without consulting his parents and without thinking hard about what he was getting himself into. When he sat down at the recruiting station at Fulton Street, he read through the papers while the recruiter kept on showing him where to sign. The man had listed Sami as an active duty soldier. Uh-oh, that's not reserves. 4 years of service and 4 years of inactive duty. And Sami stopped and asked him why. The recruiter smiled. Look, let's just list you as active duty, he says. You can change down to reserves anytime you want. That, it turns out, wasn't true. Slapping her belly. Later that evening, he told his parents, I just joined the Marines, he said after dinner, and his mom blew up. What? Why? She screamed before she started crying. His father sat back stoically. Well, good, he said. It'll teach you how to be a man. But a week later, Sami started having his own doubts. He called his recruiter. Let me get out of it, he said. You can't, the recruiter lied to him. In fact, Sami told me, he could have left, since he still had to sign a second set of contracts at basic training. Until then, the military had spent virtually no effort on him, and he would have been able to walk away from his contract without much of a penalty. But, he explained, recruiters routinely draw verbal pictures. Stop that. Pictures of stockades in jail to frighten gullible neophytes. That means kids that are dumb. He went back to his father and asked him what to do. The two of them sat down in their living room, and his father put an end to the speculation. A man finishes what he started, he said. It wasn't the facts of war that scared Sami. It was simply that he wasn't going to be living at home for the first time in his life, that he was entering an unfamiliar world, and as he put it to me, the unknown is always scary. He was a teenager, and it was May 2001. Stop it. I will kick you out of here.